And so I want to welcome you all this afternoon. This is our last seminar of this academic year. This is the Social Movements and Political Action Seminar Series. Is a seminar that has been existing for 10 years now. Is having his anniversary. Why you're crying, Tiago?
It's the last session, so.
Ah, okay. But it's restarting in October. So don't worry, you can join us then. And in October, we will have a bigger event of celebration of the 10th anniversary of the seminar. We will have an event on which title will be On the Vita Democrazia, Where Does Democracy Live? And it will be about the right to housing and right to the city in Portugal since the revolution until now. And I will share now, just very quickly, the page of our seminar, just for the ones of you that don't know the initiative. And after I give the floor to Tiago, that will introduce our today's guest, Jacopo Custodi, that I also would like to thank immediately for accepting our invitation and be here today to present his book. So the seminar, as I was saying, it has been created in 2014. It promotes a multidisciplinary reflection around the issue of social movements and political action on its different forms, it counts with very different interventions and events, and it has been continuing also in a hybrid or online form since the pandemic. So since the pandemic, we decided to move. Of course, we didn't decide really. This was the only opportunity we had at the time to move online immediately. We moved to the webinar format, and now we have both webinars and hybrid events. So this means also that all the events, or almost all the events, are recorded, and that you can find events here in our page. And now I stop here, and I will give the floor to Tiago to introduce our today's guest.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see so many familiar faces that I haven't seen some of them in a while. It's and thank you, Guia, for introducing the seminar. Also, thank you, Jacopo and Luca, for being here today, and I would like to introduce both. So Jacopo will present his book that just came out, actually. I had the pleasure to overlap with Jacopo at Scuola back in 2019 while he was developing this research. So I followed up a little bit what he was doing and talked to him a bit about this. And Jacopo, after his PhD in political science and sociology at Scuola Normale Superiore, is now a postdoctoral researcher in the same institution. And he also teaches at the campus of Georgetown University in Florence. And as you will see, his work is on nationalism and radical left parties in Spain, Portugal, and Italy, and how they frame national identity in their discourse. His current work, and here I'm citing obviously from his page, ranges from political communication and political theory to nationalism studies. Finally, he also published a book that I think is probably, I don't know, you'll probably clarify that, Jacopo, on that is Una dei paesi, la nazione nel pensiero di sinistra, is in Italian, but I'm supposing it's a version of your book in English. And then Luca, a good friend here from Lisbon, is a researcher interested in populism, radical right parties, media, and collective memory. He's been studying and I think you finished the project. No, I'm not sure, but this project called Polar, Back to the Future, Populism and Legacies of Authoritarian Regimes in Portugal and Spain. And he received his PhD from the University of Zurich in Switzerland. And I finish here and I give the floor to Jacopo. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Tiago, but also thank you, Guia, both of you, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Luca, for accepting to discuss the book today. So I'm very happy to be here, unfortunately, online. So I have a PowerPoint presentation where I will try to briefly present the main points of the book, and then maybe we can discuss more in detail some specific issues that you are more interested on. So let me try to share the screen. Okay, do you see it? Do you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. So, as Tiago said, the title is Radical Left Parties and National Identity in Spain, Italy, and Portugal. And it's based on my PhD thesis. And the PhD thesis, I discussed it a couple of years ago. And the book was published just a few months ago. It's actually not the same as the Italian one, although the topic is very similar. But this one, it's like an academic research, let's say. And the other one is the more general book on the broad issue, more in general. And just very briefly, the starting point of this research was the acknowledgement that national identity is an issue for which we see many different opinions and takes within the radical left. So ideologically similar parties treat this specific issue in very different ways. And so I wanted to understand how exactly those radical left parties talk about the nation, how do they frame it, and also why we see so many differences between parties that are very similar at the ideological level, or at least parties that are within the same party family of the European radical left. So this was kind of like the research puzzle of the book. And talking about the methodology, I used a triangulation of three different methods. The first one, and also I would say the most important one of the research, was the discourse analysis, mostly qualitative, but also some quantitative, simple quantitative analysis. And this served to answer the first research question, let's say, how those parties talk about the nation. So I analyzed the discourses of those radical left parties. And then I also conducted 30 interviews, mostly to politicians of those parties, and also few expert interviews within the three countries. And this allowed me to go deeper onto the issue and to better understand the reasons, the strategic reasons that were going on within those parties regarding this issue of the nation. And finally, I attended some events like rallies, party congress, demonstrations, and so on of those radical left parties in the three countries. I did not want to choose one specific party in each country. So the idea was to look at the whole radical left in Italy, Spain, and Portugal. But of course, I kept into consideration the different electoral relevance of the actors. So of course, for example, in Spain, I looked more about Podemos compared to other smaller parties. In Italy, it was more complex because we have many radical left parties, equally weak, I would say. So in that case, I tried to balance the analysis, but I mostly focused on the Rifondazione Comunista and Potere al Popolo, which I would say they are the most relevant radical left actors in the country. And in Portugal, as you can guess, it was the Left Bloc and the Communist Party, where most of the analysis was focused on. But before entering into the contemporary analysis, I just want to stress that this is actually an old issue. So we are not really talking about something new, because the question on how the left should treat the nation is an old question that the left-wing politics used to ask to itself since the very beginning. We see this issue already discussed in the manifesto of the Communist Party from Marx and Engels. And here we can already see some problems that kept going on through the centuries, because, you know, Marx and Engels start this paragraph with the very famous phrase, "The working men have no country." This is a phrase that everyone knows. But in the very same phrase, they also add that the proletariat, in order to win, in order to succeed in the socialist revolution, must constitute itself the nation. So must embody the nation, although not in the bourgeois sense of the word. And here, I think we can see the echo of the French Revolution, when the third estate declared itself the nation and triggered the French Revolution. So you see that there is already a tension, if not a contradiction, at least a tension. And then the green part is also interesting, because in the green part, the one that highlighted in green, they say that the nation is something that is disappearing because of the expansion of capitalism. No, they say that national differences between peoples are daily more and more vanishing. And this was an idea that not only Marx and Engels had, but also the liberal thinkers back then. It was a very common way of thinking at the beginning of the 19th century. However, Marx himself and Engels as well realized later on that this was not true, because, for example, when they started to discuss, when they started to analyze more the Irish case, for example, or the relation between the Irish working class and the British working class, they realized that national identities were actually not diminishing, not vanishing, but increasing in their political force. And this is something that we saw. If we look at the 20th century, it's probably the century of the nationalisms, no? In which nationalism was extremely strong as a political phenomenon. This just to avoid any risk of falling into some presentist analysis. The first case that I analyzed, the first empirical case, is the Spanish one. And here I will be extremely fast describing the cases, because I want to spend a few more minutes in the comparative analysis. So forgive me if I will oversimplify the issues, but I need to. So to put it very simple, in Spain, we see that since late Francoism onwards, the radical left started to distance itself from the nation. Oh, I got a sign that the reunion is...
Problem that I really don't understand, because I enter in my official Zoom account, and it starts saying that, and which I really don't understand why.
Okay, we still have 10 minutes. I don't know.
How long is your presentation more?
I don't know, probably 10 minutes, something like that.
Okay, so maybe we can finish your presentation and re-enter after, if you don't mind.
Wonderful, yes.
I'm really sorry for that.
No problem. Perfect. Okay, so I was saying that the Spanish radical left distanced itself from the nation, and this is because the Francoist regime was extremely successful in seizing Spanish identity. I would say even more successful than the fascist regime in Italy and the Salazarist regime in Portugal. I mean, the Francoist was extremely successful in making Spanish identity equal to the Francoist regime itself. And also, we see that in that period, the peripheral nationalisms increased. And those peripheral nationalisms were anti-Spain and anti-Franco. And this also something that the Spanish radical left got closer to, up to the point that it was very common for the radical left to even refuse the name of the country itself. They were not saying Spain, they were saying Spanish state, which was a term that they borrowed from the independentist movement. Long story short, Podemos tried to change this, and they tried to do so in a counter-hegemonical way, in the sense that they tried to reclaim the nation from a progressive point of view, claiming that they were the true patriots, whereas the right was an enemy of the fatherland. This was an expression that they used to use very often. And in this way, they tried in a way to strengthen their political position, because if you link yourself to the nation, it's easier not to give credibility to yourself. But on the other side, they also try to give a progressive meaning to the country, linking it to the welfare state, to pluriculturalism, and so on. But the change is so huge, and I have two very short videos I want to show you just to grasp this. The first video is from Pablo Iglesias 1 year before founding Podemos. And the second video is again from Pablo Iglesias 2 years after founding Podemos. Why it's not working?
Pero yo no puedo decir España. Yo no puedo decir España.
It was 1 year before founding Podemos.
Pero yo no.
Estáis escribiendo la historia de España. Y hoy quiero pronunciar esa palabra, España, y decir que estoy orgulloso de esa España que inventó la palabra liberal, orgulloso de esa España que expulsó a las tropas de Napoleón, orgulloso de los militares progresistas como Riego y como Torrijos, orgulloso de los liberales y demócratas españoles de la gloriosa, orgulloso de Joaquín Costa y de la institución libre de enseñanza, orgulloso de esa clase obrera que defendió los derechos sociales y el sufragio, orgulloso de la Nelken, como Dolores, como Monseni, como Victoria Ken, son nuestras madres, son nuestra matria y estamos orgullosos. Orgulloso de esa España de poetas e intelectuales como Rafael Alberti, como Antonio Machado, como Miguel Hernández, orgulloso de los mineros asturianos, orgulloso de esa España que fue el rompeolas de la solidaridad internacional y de ese pueblo español que resistió como ningún pueblo de Europa al horror y al fascismo. Estamos orgullosos de esa España. Por eso hoy decimos patria, orden, ley, instituciones, frente a los antisistema, frente a los que han fracasado, frente a los responsables de la crisis, frente a los responsables de que haya compatriotas que no puedan llegar a fin de mes ni llenar la nevera.
As you could see, there was a huge rhetorical change in this from the previous radical left, which Pablo Iglesias was a part of, compared to the Podemos strategy of reclaiming the nation from the left. Moving to the Italian case, again, I'm simplifying here, but we could say that what happened is exactly the opposite, the other way around. So historically speaking, the Italian radical left was very much at ease with the nation. We have a strong legacy of left-wing patriotism, starting from the very founder of the country, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was a patriot and also a member of the First International, for example. But also, like going on more recent days, we see the Italian Communist Party, who was highly patriotic in its rhetoric. The partisan struggle as well. They were using a lot this like patriotic narrative. So this was something very common that survived also when we returned to democracy in the 50s and the 60s and so on. But then from the 70s onwards, it started to slightly change step by step up to now, or at least up to like the last 20 years, let's say, in which the radical left in Italy was started to not be at ease at all with the Italian identity. So they started to refuse it, to not use it. It's very rare to see an Italian flag, but even the Italian colors, for example, or for example, it's very rare to hear the word Italy when they talk. If you go to a political rally from a radical left parties, and in here there are not big differences between the parties. You never hear the word Italy, for example, or at least it's very rare. So there has been a journey from patriotism to cosmopolitanism, at least in the discourse. However, there were some rifts on those topics because, you know, like in Italy, in the last years, we saw an hegemony of the nationalist right. So Italian identity became a hot topic in the political debate because the far right used it as a tool against migrants and against many different minorities against the European Union and so on. So it became a hot topic in the country. And because of that, the Italian radical left, in a sense, was forced to discuss it, or at least some did it. And here we saw some like different responses. But what we did not have was a counter-hegemonical attempt in the same way Podemos did. So the most common replies were to like, the most common one was to just get even more far from the nation, because if Italian identity means what Salvini and Meloni say it means, then I don't want to have anything to do with that. So there was a further step. And some other parties, some other groups at least, tried to like get closer, but they did not do it in a counter-hegemonical way. So in a sense, we saw the emergence of some right-wing discourses, even within the radical left, with some small and minority groups, for example, turning critical against migration and so on. Going to the last case, the Portuguese case, again, it's a different case. And the difference, because you had the revolution. And you know, the transition in Spain was a transición pactada. So it was like a moderate transition made in an agreement with the previous elite and so on. So there was no big resignification of national identity by the leaders of the new democratic path. This was not the case in Portugal. The revolution, in my estimation, but we can discuss that, was quite successful in resignifying Portuguese identity and like getting rid of some of the elements of the Salazarist regime. And we see that, for example, in the narrative of the Communist Party, the Portuguese Communist Party, which has no problem in identifying with Portugal, in using the national colors, in talking about being a patriot, and so on, in saying they fight for the national interest, and so on. And this, I argue, I mean, there are different reasons, but I would say the most important reason is the revolution, because the revolution allowed the party to relate to the nation in a way different than the one of the regime. And we see a legacy of that also in the left bloc. I mean, the left bloc is a much more modern party, more coming from the new left and so on. So they don't use this old style socialist patriotism as the communists, but nonetheless, we see that they are much more at ease with the nation compared with similar parties abroad. So I was saying, regarding the left bloc, you can see the echo of this, of what I'm talking about, in the fact that when they talk in their discourse, references to the country are very much present. For example, when they frame a policy proposal, it's always a policy proposal for the country, something in the interest of the country. And this is something, for example, that you don't find in Rifondazione Comunista in Italy. The policy proposals are always for targeted groups, workers, migrants, LGBTQ plus people, and so on. Whereas this idea of country is common in the left bloc, even though they don't use a patriotic rhetoric in the same way that the communist parties do. And talking about the reasons that are behind these differences, of course, it's never possible to find one specific reason. Things are always complex and intertwined. Some reasons we have already mentioned, but here I put some of those that I believe are more important. So the different types of transition to democracy here matters a lot, the way in which the democracy was achieved. Also, the outcome of the 2011 protest is important here, because, for example, in Spain, they were huge, and they allowed the radical left to renew its repertoire, its discursive repertoire. And the fact that the protests were very weak and unsuccessful in Italy did not allow this rhetorical renovation within the Italian radical left. Then, of course, the hegemony of the nationalist right matters, because it's influential whether the topic of the nation is central in the debate or it is not. In Italy, it was. In Portugal, before Chega, it was not, for example. And also in Spain, before Vox, it was not. Finally, populism. Populism is a key issue here, because the parties that try to adopt adopt this populist strategy, like Podemos in its early years, of course needed to go back to the nation up to a certain extent, because it's very difficult to conceive the people not as the people nation. And here we go back to the Gramsci idea of the national popular. There is some level of intertwinement between the two. We can discuss that, it's a complex matter, but still there is this dimension. And finally, the last point I want to say here is Euroscepticism, because from the literature, we know, or at least the literature used to say, that the parties on the left that are Eurosceptic tend also to turn into patriotism. So they found a link between nationalism and Euroscepticism, even within the left. And in my analysis, I found that this is actually more complex. Sometimes it's true. It's true in Portugal, for example, because if you analyze the discourse of the left bloc and of the Communist Party during the peak of the austerity crisis, we see that there is an increase of patriotic rhetoric in both parties. So it's true that when Euroscepticism grows, reference to the countries grow. But for example, this is not true in Italy, because we had some parties who used to be highly Eurosceptic. I'm thinking about Potere al Popolo and especially Eurostop, which was this group within Potere al Popolo, that were highly anti-European, but they framed their anti-Europeanism without any reference to the nation. They were not using references to Italy as a way to construct their anti-Europeanism. So this is not always true. Here, I just put like a table with the different findings using some theoretical concepts like sedimentation of national identity, politicization, floatingness, but I will not dig into that, but just to show that it's also possible to map what I'm talking about through a theoretical angle that is coming from like the discourse theory and so on. And finally, this is the last slide. What I tried to do at the end of the book was to propose a typology. Of course, this is a tentative typology because I just analyzed 3 countries. So this should be tested in other contexts as well. But what I found is that it's not just about whether the left endorse patriotism or not. But the issue here is how exactly they relate to the nation. And there are different ways of doing that. The one of the Communist Party in Portugal, I call it social patriotism, and it's the typical patriotism of the last century communist parties, in which they combine worker-centered socialist elements with patriotism, and in which they have a political culture that is very much rooted in national tradition, in national culture, and so on, in national history. It's a very different type of patriotism compared to the patriotism of the early Podemos, for example, because it's true that Podemos at the beginning was talking a lot about the patria and so on. But there was not strong connection with national culture, with national history, and so on. It was a more artificial, in a sense, a more constructed patriotism. And it was also more confrontational. So it was always used to attack the adversary. It was not so much part of the party culture. It was a party weapon. And finally, another type again is the one of the left bloc that I called national cosmopolitanism. Because on one side, it's true that the left bloc political culture is mainly rooted on cosmopolitanism, and the references to nationalities are scarce. They're not very common in the discourse. But at the same time, as I said before, policy proposals are framed as for the country. The claim of representing the country is common. And the idea itself of the nation state is central. It's considered the central political arena. And finally, the last type that I propose is the one of post-national cosmopolitanism that is typical within the discourse of the Communist Refondation Party, Rifondazione Comunista in Italy, that even changed the number to Communist Refondation Party European Left, that they put the European identity even on the name. So it's not just that the political culture is mostly cosmopolitan and that references to nationality are absent, but there is not this idea of representing the country. Policy proposals are not framed as for the country, and the country itself is rarely expressed in positive terms. Of course, I'm simplifying here. We also saw some small changes in the very last years, but I would say that the type still holds, broadly speaking. So this should be all. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your comments. And I apologize if it took longer than expected.
No, we thank you, Jacopo. You didn't take more time than expected, and we apologize for this small accident. And now I think it's solved, so we can move on with the discussion. And we give the floor to Luca.
Yeah, thank you, Jacopo, for.
Do you need to share a screen too?
Sorry?
Do you need to share the screen, Luca?
No need. Thanks, Guia and Tiago, for organizing the seminar, and to the public for being here. I don't want to take too much time because I would like also to hear questions from those attending. But I have a few remarks I would like to make. So first, this is a great book in my opinion, and I don't say it because I like Jacopo. I say it because I like the book. First of all, the book opens with a scene from Lisbon during the pandemic on April 25th, the celebrations for the revolution. So that's already a good enough reason to open the book and dig deeper. But jokes aside, I think this is one of the best works on the radical left that I've read in recent years. I use Jacopo's work on the left, on nationalism especially, because I normally teach the radical right, the populist radical right. And of course, one of the elements of the populist radical right is nationalism, or in a way, nativism. And I use Jacopo's work because I think it's great to show to the students, to open their minds to the possibility of left-wing parties articulating a nationalist or patriotic discourse as well, to show that there is such a thing, it exists, it is studied. And when we talk of nationalism, of course, we immediately think about the populist radical right because they are electorally successful and fill in the media, but there is also left-wing populism. So I think Jacopo's work, and this book in particular, really fills an important gap in the literature, which is the left-wing approach to nationalism. Although in the book, Jacopo shows very nicely that in reality, it seems strange today, the combination between left-wing ideologies and nationalism, but in fact, the combination of the two goes way back to the French Revolution. But it's true that today, things have changed. I also liked a lot the whole beginning of the book, the first chapters, because the literature presented is really vast. The connections made by different authors are amazing. The theoretical section is well informed and convincing. Methodologically, it's very rich as well. Jacopo uses discourse analysis, semi-structured interviews, participant observation, and I think combining these different methodologies really brings the reader into the topics discussed. So I like it a lot. And last but not least, the cases that Jacopo discusses, all the parties that he talks about. It's a very detailed description, very detailed analysis. You can see how he knows these parties and their discourse. And I think even just for someone who studies any of these parties, there is a lot to learn from Jacopo's book, even if the approach is not specifically on nationalism. Nonetheless, whoever studying Bloco de Esquerda in Portugal or Podemos should absolutely have a look at the book because of the really detailed description of these cases. Now, that's enough for the praises, and I think it's clear that I like a lot of things in this book. I think it's clear that I recommend everybody reading it because it's a great work. And I have 3 questions for Jacopo so that we can open, collegial discussion involving also the public. So my first question, which I had before reading the book, and in a certain way I had now, after reading the book, although with a different approach, is the following. So is there a way for the radical left to reclaim a nationalist approach without falling into the trap of going into a field of discourse that, of course, is, possibly advantaging the far right? Should the left try to contest the idea of nation to the right? And if yes, how do you think, after having analyzed these cases, how do you think that this could be done? My second question, I hope it doesn't bring us too far from the discussion, but I just came back from Lyon in France, as some colleagues did at the CIES conference. And of course, there has been the, let's call it victory, or anyway, the good performance of Le Nouveau Front Populaire, and specifically of Mélenchon, La France Insoumise. And I'm just curious, in your opinion, of course, the book is not about that, so if you don't know, don't worry, but I would be curious to know, in your opinion, in terms of nationalist discourse, how La France Insoumise connects to the discourses articulated by the left-wing parties you analyze in the book. If there is another example among the parties you analyze that is closer, maybe to Mélenchon's nationalism, I would be curious to know about that. And last, then I shut up and I open the floor for the discussion. My last point is, of course, writing a book is challenging and takes a long time. We all know that. So normally when I finish a book, I immediately start thinking of what I could have done different, what has changed since the time I started working on it. I presume you have started working on this book many months ago, if not years. So I would like to know from you, what do you think in the book as it stands right now? What is its strongest element, something that you think will be very useful for analyzing nationalism in the left in the next years, and what, on the other hand, already kind of aged badly, in the sense that if you could, change something of your analysis or your conclusions, interpretations, what would this aspect be? So, in a way, just to conclude, in what ways do you think that the book really contributes to the line of research on the left and nationalism in the next years? What is its biggest contribution, and what would you rather, wish you had time to rewrite and change? Anyway, thank you so much, Jacopo. Great presentation, and I look forward to hear your question.
Okay, thank you so much, Luca. This is a typical question for expert in interviewing people working on these things. I read this question many in others contexts. Is always this final question is always very interesting. So maybe now we open the floor just to tell you that this problem we have continues. So if the meeting starts, we do again the same. There is no problem. It's very quick, and we just continue our discussion without stress. Okay. So now maybe I would like to collect some more questions if someone wants to ask something, and after to give the floor again to Jacopo for his answers. Some more questions?
But maybe we can let Jacopo respond to mine while people have some brainstorming.
Perfect.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much, Luca, for your very kind words. And I'm not sure I deserve all of them, but thank you so much. And thank you also for the points, which are very good. And actually, the first point you raised, it's not it's not the first time I get it when I present this book. So I'm starting to wondering if there is really something missing on that aspect. And the answer is yes, it's missing that discussion that you are mentioning. But in a certain sense, I did it on purpose because I was afraid of entering too much into a normative discussion, because if you start to discuss about the risk, the effect, the success. I mean, I could have said something more, definitely, but I was just afraid, let's say. But I mean, talking frankly, yes, there are many risks in doing this strategy, this strategy of reclaiming the nation from the left. And the risk are various, but the biggest one, I would say, is the one that you were mentioning already in the question. The fact that in doing so, you are triggering a semantic field where the right is stronger. But this does not mean, in my opinion, that this strategy then it's always wrong or it's always unsuccessful. It just means that if you do it, you have to do it right. And also you need to be enough strong to have a counter-hegemonical power. Because let's say, just to give a banal example, if I go on the street with an Italian flag and I scream left-wing slogan, I'm not resignifying Italian identity. I'm just making the fool of myself. So it's necessary that a party has an hegemonical power to resignify this and to enter in the hegemonical debate with the right, if not at the same level, at least in a power balanced position, because otherwise it's unsuccessful and the risk is just of triggering those issues that are easier for the right to politicize. But there is also lots of potential, and we saw that with Podemos, because, for example, this strategy was very effective, in my opinion, in the rhetoric of Podemos when they were attacking, for example, the privatizations of the right, the cut of welfare, and so on, or the fact that big companies were putting the companies abroad in order to not pay taxes, framing all of this as a betrayal of the motherland, of the fatherland, sounded powerful, rhetorically speaking. So there is a risk, but there is also potential. And this leads me to the second question, because another risk is to overlooking ethnic plurality, no? There is this risk of like perpetuating a monocultural and mononational identity. But the French case is interesting because it proved that this is not doomed to be, because Mélenchon was very successful, at least rhetorically speaking, in framing an idea of France that is pluricultural and pluriethnical. And I was listening, as many of you, I guess, the discourses that the main French leaders gave after the results. And the one of Mélenchon was very emblematic of this, because he started to scream in front of the crowd that the French people is not a language. The French people is not an ethnic identity. The French people is not a culture. The French people is a collective will, is a people that fight for the interest, and the interest of the nation are the interest of the people, and so on. And then, I mean, I'm not surprised that in this way, Mélenchon was able to get incredible results in the suburbs of Paris, for example, where the migrant community is very huge. We see, for example, in Saint-Denis, they got 65% of the votes, and they did so using French identity and French symbols, but framed in a way that was compatible with ethnic pluralism. Again, not easy to do, but not impossible. And moving to the strong part and the weak part of the book. So let's start from the weak part. That something that aged badly. I mean, there are many things that aged badly, if I have to be honest. Also because I started this research in 2017. And you know better than me how it works with like academic books. It takes a while to get out. So since you finish it and you see it on store, it passed lots of time and few things are already changed. But I would say that something that aged badly, the thing that mostly aged badly is Podemos itself. So the party I'm discussing about in the book is not the party that it exists now. It's something completely different. And I sketched that in the book because I saw it coming in a sense. I mean, there were already changes, but I did not develop it enough. And of course, I did not link this with the national question because Podemos is not using patriotism anymore. And this would be something interesting to discuss, and it's not present in the book. The strong part of the book, I think, is the fact that it goes beyond dichotomical understanding. Because I would say that, I mean, in general, in the literature, the issue of the nation was not very much discussed within the left. But when it was always in a dichotomical way. Either the left endorsed the nation, like the Irish case, the independentist case, or whatever, or does not. What I wanted to show in the book is that we need to go beyond dichotomical understanding, because there are different degrees of claiming the nation, and there are different ways of doing that, different levels of that. And I think this is something very important. Otherwise, we misunderstand what is really going on.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacopo. There is a question by the audience, Bruno.
Hello, Jacopo. I'm sorry because my camera is not working, but I believe you hear me. I have a question. In Latin America, the nationalism has an emancipatory dimension. Do you consider that this reclaim by the radical parties in Portugal and Spain is a result for a possible semi-peripheral condition in the system? The situation of this country is very, has a similarity with the country, for example, like Brazil, my country including. What do you think about?
I also have a quick question, but I don't know if there is someone else for me. Anna.
Thank you. I was wondering, what about the communication between these three parties, how they are interacting with one another, aware of one another? I'm not too familiar with that. I would love to hear more about that, particularly because of something that you just said, Jacopo, I think trying to answer Luca regarding what has been successful for some and how they might be kind of learning from each other. So I was thinking more on those terms, if you could speak to that. Thank you. Great work.
Iago?
Quick question as well. I had a lot of stuff here, but anyway, one is, do you have any inputs on Sumar that came to replace Podemos? On one hand, I mean, replace. I haven't followed Spanish politics in a while, so I need to refollow it. The other thing was, how are and tell me if this doesn't make sense, but one of the things that, traditionally left-wing parties talk about is inequalities. Is there any link between the way they talk of inequalities and the nation state? Also, did you analyze trade unions, and trade unions were in some way related to this? Because I think the CGTP is very close to PCP, but I was thinking if there was something about that. I had a question about Oxalá, because I saw that you have a recent paper about Oxalá, but if you have time to speak a bit about him, but if not, we can speak about it some other day. Thank you.
Maybe I just ask very quickly my questions, if there isn't anybody else. So maybe something that you say that I missed it because I was trying to solve Zoom problems. So if it's the case, forgive me. One point is about about the relationship with social movements, and if the fact that these are mostly many of them are movement parties, and then not just movement parties, but also specific movements that are the anti-austerity movements in many cases, that had a specific, at the very beginning they had this idea of, particularly in Spain and Portugal, anti-party idea. So this influenced also the relationship with the movement, with the parties that were more connected to them. And after, if there is a Podemos model, so if Podemos created a new model of dealing with these issues, or if just a continuity of this is really a breaking point in the story that you are narrating. That is a very you dealt very well also with the past, with the roots of these ideas and with this concept and these narratives.
Thank you very much for all these questions. I'll do my best to respond to them. So Bruno, this is a very good question, the one you did about Latin America. I talk about Latin America in the book. I did not have time to do it in the presentation, but it's a good point because in Latin America, again, Latin America is a huge area of the world, so there are differences, but broadly speaking, the left has no problem with national identity. On the contrary, it tends to use it a lot in the narrative, no? We saw that with all the Bolivarian left, no, Hugo Chavez and so on. And this was an inspiration for the left in Europe that tried to reclaim the nation. I'm thinking about Podemos, but up to a certain extent also Mélenchon, for example. However, there are big differences, because if you take, for example, the case of Chavez, this was not a resignification. It was not a counter-hegemonical strategy. It was just the left using national popular symbolic repertoire, and they always used to do that. So there was not a big change on that, and not big difficulties on that. I'm simplifying, but still. In Podemos, it was completely opposite, because when they decided to do that, Spanish identity was something very much right-wing, at least in the political landscape, no? Something perceived to be right-wing. So they needed to resignify that. And also it was difficult for them because they did not have all the cultural and symbolic elements that, for example, the left in Latin America had. Just to give you an example, Chavez used to appear in public many times with the national colors, no? A hoodie colored with the Venezuelan flag. And this was something that Podemos was not able to do because the flag was too much to resignify. So even if the discourse was highly patriotic, they never used the Spanish flag, for example. And this already shows you some weakness within this strategy, no? Some artificial dimension, rhetoric dimension of this strategy. But of course, it was an inspiration, the Latin American example. And the idea was to copy that. And Anna, regarding the communication between those parties, I mean, of course, there are communication, but my opinion is that right now, the left in Europe is weaker in its international coordination, or at least in European coordination, compared to the right. So we don't have at this moment very strong supranational coordination between radical left parties in Europe. Of course, there are some of them. There is the European Left Party, and there is the ex-GUE, I mean, the left group in the European Parliament, but they're not very strong. And I would say that this dimension of the nation did not enter much in the discussion between those parties at the supranational level. There was a little bit at the beginning with Podemos. When Podemos tried this strategy, there was a very much interest from different groups in different European countries. And here I go back to what you, Guia, were saying, if there is a Podemos model or not. Some believed so. So in 2014 and 2015, there was this idea within the European radical left that Podemos is the way forward, is the example. And up to a certain extent, also Syriza was the example. And actually, Syriza was not so much different than Podemos in this. There were differences, of course, but regarding the national issue, also Syriza was using a lot this Greek identity in a progressive way, in an anti-austerity way. So there were similarities. But I would say that eventually we did not see any Podemos-like party to emerge, successfully emerge in other European countries. So there was in the theory a Podemos model, of course, but in the practice, I struggle to see it. And the other point of view, Guia, was social movements. And again, I would say this is a point in which we see many differences between the three countries. Because, for example, the link with social movements was very important in Spain, up to the point that we tend to call Podemos a movement party, as you said, no? Exactly because there was this strong link with the social movement. And this influenced a lot the rhetoric and the populist strategy of the party, because they were trying to use the narrative of the 15M movement, no? Which was much more national popular in a sense compared to the one of the traditional Spanish radical left. But for example, this is not the case in Italy. And again, in Portugal is a middle ground situation, I would say, because we saw huge social mobilization in the anti-austerity years, also in Portugal, but the radical left was already strong. So there was not, but we can discuss that, but my opinion is that there was not a huge rhetorical change because of the mobilization, because the link between the social movements and the radical left were already existed, whereas in Spain it was different. And to Tiago, so Sumar, it's a difficult question, I would say. And I wonder whether it's an important question, because Sumar is already disappearing in the same way as Podemos did. Yolanda Diaz resigned from the leadership of the party. So we'll see what will happen. I don't know. But my impression is that in Sumar, there is not at all this counter-hegemonical attempt that there was in Podemos at the beginning. But what we see is a certain degree of banal nationalism. So in a sense, Sumar is trying to present itself as a normal institutional national party. And because of that, they tend to link themselves to some element of banal nationalism. So they have no problem with the flag, for example, because they are an institutional force. So there is not this like populist-like resignification or claim of the nation, but there is a certain degree of banal nationalism. So there is no refusal of nationality either. And just to conclude, the link that you were mentioning between inequality and the nation state, yes, that's an important point that emerged many times in the different countries. We saw that, for example, in the Communist Party, I would say, in Portugal. But we saw also in Podemos. So there was this attempt to link belonging to the nation with the right to the welfare state, no? With the right of being all the same, of being like normal people that deserve social rights and so on. And this is what characterizes you as a member of the country, regardless of the skin color, even regardless of the language, because in Spain there is this issue of the language, no? So something that Podemos was saying a lot at the beginning was that being Spaniard has nothing to do with the language, has nothing to do with the culture, but it has to do with having rights, with being equal, being with honest, decent people. And here you see the populist influence, no? This moral idea of being good people. So yes, there was this against the ultra-rich that are traitor of the country because they don't pay taxes, so they don't help the others, and they trigger inequality and so on. I hope I answered your questions.
Wow.
Thank you again.
I hope that you didn't run too much, that you weren't scared by the Zoom.
No. This time I didn't see. I was so much focused.
Okay.
I didn't see.
Because, no, I think you answered very precisely to all the questions. And I don't know if someone else has something to ask or some comment. So what's next? What's your next project?
We'll see. Right now, I'm actually working on something else because I'm part of a research project on journalism and disinformation. So it's something different, but I'm still working on this, on the left and nationalism, but as a side project. Let's see on the future. I don't know, but the idea is to keep working on that, or at least to keep working on the left, on the radical left, maybe exploring other issues. There is also this dimension of the culture wars that are very, very topical right now, no? So I think this is an issue where it would be worth doing some more research on how the left react to those culture wars and so on.
Yeah, this is a fantastic and difficult topic.
Well, if I can have a concluding remark, during also the questions, I was wondering about an aspect. Specifically, it's a bit counterintuitive that the far right manages to create these transnational links, especially within the European Parliament. Now we are going towards maybe 3 or even 4 groups within the European Parliament. While this was not the case, because up until the 2000s, the far right really struggled because of nationalism to come together. The left, on the other hand, should theoretically be more prone to a transnational, international collaboration, workers of the world unite, etc., etc. So in theory, it should be easier for the left to find the common ground to fight together for workers' rights, but also, as you were saying, cultural wars, LGBT rights, environment. There would be plenty of issues on which the left could unite, and Varoufakis with the M25 showed that some people are trying to do that, but I don't know why in 60 seconds do you think the far right is managing to coalesce around a common program and the left is struggling to do so?
It's an incredibly difficult question, but I fully agree with your description of the picture. I think this is really what you're saying, exactly like that. I mean, just one comment to say on this is that right now the right is very strong at the European level, and I have the impression that when you are stronger, so you get closer to power in a sense, you also turn more pragmatic, and you understand that cooperation at the European level is important. Whereas as long as you are kind of irrelevant, it's easier to fall into sectorism or to small divergences that don't permit collaboration and so on. But that's just a hot take, I don't know, but the picture is the one that you described, I agree.
Guia, maybe we can close within the last 20 seconds.
I didn't want to stress you. I also wanted to say some words and at least thank you very much, Jacopo. It was a really great session and I really enjoyed it, and I think I will read the book finally. It was a busy end of semester and I couldn't really, and really excellent job. I don't know if some